The air over Nazi Germany in the winter of 1944 was the most lethally contested space on the planet. For the young men of the United States 8th Air Force, each mission was a grim statistical gamble played out at 25,000 feet, in sub-zero temperatures and amidst a storm of steel. They flew in the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, a symbol of American industrial might and aerial determination. Yet, for all its formidable appearance and bristling gun positions, the fortress was not impervious. It was a metal cocoon hurtling through a sky infested with hunters. Swarms of agile cannon-armed German Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, piloted by seasoned, desperate defenders of the Reich. Within this flying colossus, one position was universally dreaded: the tail gunner's turret. Isolated at the very aft end of the aircraft, it was a cramped, freezing plexiglass and steel cage dangling over a mile above the earth. Separated from the warmth and camaraderie of the main crew compartment, the tail gunner was a man alone with his twin 50 caliber Browning machine guns and a vast, terrifying view of the sky behind. He was the bomber's rear-facing eyes and its last line of defense, and he was the primary target. German fighter pilots were tactically astute. Their standard attack profile, the stern attack, was brutally logical. Coming in from directly behind and slightly high, the 6 o'clock high position, they aimed to destroy the bomber's control surfaces, and most efficiently, to eliminate the tail gunner first. A blinded bomber was a doomed bomber. The statistics, cold and bureaucratic, told a horrific story. In early 1944, the life expectancy of a B-17 tail gunner was measured in missions. He had a staggering 38% chance of not surviving his 25-mission tour, the highest casualty rate of any crew position on the aircraft. It wasn't just a job, it was a death sentence with a serial number. Official U.S. Army Air Force's gunnery doctrine, born from pre-war theory and early combat experiences, seemed designed for this grim reality. But it only managed it, never challenged it. The manuals preached a gospel of conservation and reaction. Gunners were drilled to hold their fire, to wait for the enemy to commit to his attack run. They were to track the lead fighter visually, calculate deflection, and only open up with short, controlled bursts at the last possible moment, usually inside 600 yards. The sacred tenets were: conserve ammunition, maximize accuracy, fire defensively. The logic was rooted in fear. Fear of running empty before the long flight home. Fear of wasting precious resources. But in practice, this defensive posture ceded all initiative to the attacker. German pilots knew the American gunners were trained to wait. They used this knowledge to orchestrate their assaults with chilling precision. They would form up in staggered shawarma, swarms, the lead fighter drawing fire while his wingmen swooped in for the kill. The defensive gunner, following his training, would focus on the immediate threat, only to be shredded by cannon fire from an unseen angle. He was reacting to a script written by the enemy, and the ending was always the same: a catastrophic explosion, a crippled fortress spinning toward the German countryside, or the silent, final drift of a tail turret severed clean from its fuselage. Morale in the tail gunner ranks was a complex mix of bravado and fatalism. Many viewed their assignment as a curse. Crew chiefs swapped stories of men who emerged from the position shell-shocked, their hands trembling so violently they couldn't light a cigarette. Some requested transfers to any other duty. The position itself developed a macabre nickname among ground crews: the suicide seat. It was a metal coffin waiting to be filled, a fact everyone knew, but no one in command knew how to change. The sheer volume of bombers being lost, Black Week in October 1943 had seen nearly 100 fortresses shot down in days, demanded a solution. But the solution seemed to be simply building more bombers and training more doomed boys to sit in that frozen cage. This was the unchangeable reality of the air war in March 1944. The strategy was one of brutal attrition, hoping American production could outlast German skill and desperation. For the tail gunner, survival was a matter of luck, accuracy under unimaginable pressure, and the desperate prayer that the Focke-Wulf aiming at you today was a rookie, not an ace. The doctrine was a prayer for mercy, not a plan for victory. It was into this entrenched culture of reactive defense, this acceptance of catastrophic loss, that a man who had learned a very different set of rules on the ground would arrive. His name was Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan, and he did not believe in waiting for death to introduce itself. He believed in going out to meet it, with both barrels blazing. The sky was about to learn the difference. Michael Donovan's war did not begin over the foggy fields of East Anglia or in the thin, lethal air of the stratosphere. It began decades earlier in the hardscrabble working-class neighborhoods of South Boston, a world governed by a simpler, more visceral code than any military manual. Here, survival was not an abstract statistic or a tactical doctrine. It was a daily negotiation conducted with fists, wit, and an unflinching awareness of threat. The son of a dock worker and the brother of a Golden Gloves contender, Donovan's childhood was a curriculum in practical violence. The lessons were direct and unforgiving. Hesitation was vulnerability, opportunity was fleeting, and the best, often the only defense, was a swift, overwhelming offense. By the age of 17, Donovan had been in 32 documented street fights. He had won 28 of them. The 4 losses, he would later say with characteristic bluntness, were because he started too late. In the alleyways and vacant lots of his youth, he internalized a fundamental truth that would later defy Air Force orthodoxy. The combatant who controls the initiative controls the fight. Waiting for an opponent to swing first meant you were already reacting to his plan, already on the back foot, already absorbing damage. The goal was not to weather an attack, but to prevent it from being launched in its ideal form. This was not reckless brawling. It was a calculated economy of force. A single, well-placed punch thrown early could end a confrontation before it truly began, saving you from a prolonged, damaging exchange. It was a brutal form of efficiency. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, Donovan, like millions of young American men, enlisted with a fierce desire to contribute. He gravitated towards the Army Air Forces, drawn to the technical challenge and the promise of action. His initial aptitude tests and his background, however, pegged him for the ground crew, mechanics, logistics, the essential but unglamorous backbone of the air war. Donovan wanted none of it. He insisted, with a stubbornness that would become his trademark, on aerial gunnery school. He wanted to be in the fight, not just support it from the safety of an airfield. His arrival at gunnery school was a collision of philosophies. The instructors, often veterans of the early bloody raids, drilled a gospel of disciplined fire control. They taught the mechanics of the .50 caliber machine gun, the complex geometry of lead calculation for a moving target from a moving platform, and the sacred importance of the cone of fire, the idea that a gunner's effectiveness began only when an enemy entered a specific, relatively close range. They preached conservation above all else. Wasting ammunition on long-range, low-probability shots was a cardinal sin. It left you defenseless for the inevitable, closer attacks. Donovan struggled with this reactive mindset. During live fire tracking exercises, he consistently acquired and simulated firing on target drones earlier than any other trainee, often while they were still dots on the horizon. Instructors reprimanded him for violating procedure, for speculative firing. In one now legendary classroom exchange, a frustrated instructor challenged him. "You're too aggressive, Donovan. You expose yourself. You waste rounds. A German fighter pilot will see your tracers from a mile out and simply adjust. You're making yourself a target." Donovan's reply, delivered without theatricality but with absolute conviction, silenced the room and became a foundational legend passed among subsequent classes of gunners. "Dead gunners don't shoot back, sir," he said. "Live ones do. I'd rather have him adjusting to me than me waiting for him." It was the street fighter's logic, translated perfectly to aerial combat. The goal was not just to hit the enemy, but to disrupt his mind, to break his rhythm, to impose your will upon his. He graduated third in his class, a high ranking, but one that baffled the instructors who marked him down for technique. His score wasn't driven by pinpoint accuracy on the static range. It was propelled by his phenomenal, almost instinctual speed of acquisition. In simulated combat runs, he could identify, track, and align his sights on a target faster than anyone they had seen. His secret, though he never framed it as such, was that he was not merely reacting to a threat. He was proactively hunting it. He studied the approach angles, predicted the merge, and was mentally and physically poised to strike the moment a potential threat materialized, not when it became an immediate one. This mentality made him an anomaly, a question mark. He was a brilliant weapon without a suitable doctrine. In late 1943, as the 8th Air Force bled itself white over Germany, Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan was assigned to the 390th Bombardment Group at Framlingham, England. He was posted to a B-17G flying fortress named Hell's Fury. The aircraft, like many, had a personality and a reputation. It had flown 3 missions. On 2 of them, it had suffered near-catastrophic encounters with German fighters. The previous tail gunner, a Sergeant Eddie Morrison, had survived physically, but was a shattered nerve. He requested an immediate transfer off the aircraft, telling the crew chief in a haunted voice, "That position's cursed. The next man dies there." When the posting came up, it was seen as a punishment detail, a slot for a replacement fresh off the boat who didn't know any better. Donovan volunteered for it immediately. The pilot, Captain James Whitmore, a seasoned veteran with 10 missions under his belt, interviewed him personally, a rare courtesy for a tail gunner. Whitmore was direct. "You know the statistics, Sergeant?" "I've heard them, sir." "Tail gunner on this ship. Highest casualty rate on the plane. 38% don't finish their tour. You understand what that means?" Donovan met his gaze. "Then I've got 62% odds, Captain. I'll take them." Whitmore was taken aback. "Why? Why this ship? Why that position?" "Because," Donovan said, the ghost of a South Boston alley in his steady tone, "I don't plan on waiting for them to shoot me. I plan to shoot first." Whitmore studied the young man, the calm eyes, the lack of bluster, the quiet certainty. He saw not recklessness, but a different kind of calculation. He finally nodded, a decision that would alter the fates of thousands. "You're insane," Whitmore said. a faint smile touching his lips. "You'll fit right in." The stage was set. The weapon was in place. The unchangeable doctrine of the air war was about to meet the immovable logic of a street fighter from South Boston. Hell's Fury had found its spirit. The briefing for March 6, 1944, was grim. The target? The Messerschmitt Aircraft Factory complex at Augsburg, deep in the German heartland. Intelligence predicted a perfect storm of resistance, flak concentrations thicker than anything previously encountered, and an estimated 2,500 German fighters scrambled from across the Reich to defend the vital facility. The mood in the briefing hut was a familiar cloak of tension, muted by fatigue and the silent arithmetic every man performed. Captain James Whitmore gathered the crew of Hell's Fury for a final word. "This one's going to be rough from start to finish," he said, his voice flat. "Stay sharp. Stay in formation. Stay alive." It was the standard exhortation, a wish more than an order. It was then that Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan, the new tail gunner, broke protocol. He raised a hand. "Captain, permission to try something different on this run, sir." A ripple of curiosity went through the crew. Whitmore frowned. "Different how, Sergeant?" "Aggressive fire, sir, from the start. I want to engage the fighters while they're still forming up, miles out. Force them to defend or scatter before they can even begin their attack run." Whitmore's frown deepened. "That's a fast way to an empty ammo box, Donovan. You'll be dry before we even reach the initial point. Then what? You're a spectator while they pick us apart." Donovan's voice was calm, logical, cutting through the ambient fear. "Or I prevent the fight altogether, sir. We've been playing pure defense for 2 years. How's that working for us? 38%. Maybe it's time we stopped waiting to get shot and made them wait, and wonder." The silence in the crew compartment was absolute. It was heresy, spoken aloud. Whitmore held Donovan's gaze, weighing the steady confidence against the monumental risk. He was betting the lives of 9 men and a $300,000 aircraft on a theory from a rookie gunner. He made his decision.
"You've got one mission to prove it," Whitmore said finally. "If we get shredded because you're shooting at ghosts, you're off the gun for good. Deal?" "Deal, sir." Hell's Fury lifted off from Framlingham at 06:47 hours into a dull English dawn. The formation assembled over East Anglia, a vast, sprawling armada of aluminum and explosive destiny. They crossed the channel, the rhythmic thrum of 4 Wright Cyclone engines a constant vibration in the bones. At 08:24, they crossed into German airspace. The familiar cold dread settled in. The flak began first, innocent-looking black puffs that blossomed with murderous force around them, shrapnel pinging against the fuselage like psychotic hail. They held formation, weaving through the deadly garden. Then, at 09:19, the call they all dreaded crackled over the intercom. "Fighters, 6 o'clock high, 12 bandits, forming up." In the tail turret, Donovan swiveled his twin .50 caliber Brownings. Through his illuminated K4 gun sight, he saw them. A swarm of 12 BF-109s, sleek and predatory, about 2,000 yards out. They were maneuvering into a classic echelon formation, the Schwarm, preparing for a coordinated stern attack. This was the moment Doctrine demanded patience. Wait, let them commit, conserve. Donovan took a breath, exhaled slowly, and broke every rule he'd been taught. First move, the disruption. At 2,000 yards, maximum range, where the ballistic drop of his rounds made a hit a matter of pure luck, he depressed the triggers. A long, walking burst of tracer fire lanced out across the void. Most rounds fell hundreds of feet short or wide, streaking through empty sky. The effect was not physical, but psychological. The neat German formation shuddered and scattered like a flock of startled birds. The lead fighter broke hard right. The wingmen hesitated. Their disciplined approach shattered before it began.
Over the intercom, Whitmore's voice tense. "Donovan, cease fire. You're wasting ammunition." "Negative, sir," Donovan replied, his eyes never leaving the reforming dots. "Watch what happens next." Second move, the psychological seizure. The Germans regrouped, but their approach had changed. It was cautious, probing, devoid of the confident, diving aggression of moments before. The initiative had subtly shifted. Donovan let them close to 1,500 yards. He fired again. Not a wild barrage, but short, controlled bursts that walked through the center of their loose formation. He wasn't trying to hit. He was trying to intimidate, to make every pilot in that swarm feel personally targeted. It worked. The formation broke again, more chaotically, but one BF-109, a wingman on the left flank, held his course. Donovan recognized the type, a veteran, unshaken by tracers, committed to the kill. This one required a different calculus. Third move, the application of overwhelming force. Donovan let the veteran close. He ignored the screaming instinct to fire at 1,200 yards, then 1,000. He let the fighter fill his entire sight, a growing deadly speck. At 800 yards, the very edge of what was considered his effective range, but well inside the Germans' deadly 20mm cannon range, Donovan made his move. He didn't fire a burst. He unleashed a sustained, concussive barrage, pouring over 200 rounds into a 3-second torrent of fire. The concentration of 50 caliber rounds was a physical wall. The German pilot tried to brake, but his evasive maneuver flew him directly into the stream. The engine cowling disintegrated. A flash of fuel and flame, and the BF-109 came apart, pieces cartwheeling into the abyss. "Good kill," the radio operator yelled. Donovan didn't acknowledge it. He was already tracking the next target, his mind cold, clear, operating on the pure logic he'd learned long ago. One threat down. Assess the next. The remaining 11 fighters had seen the fate of their comrade. They knew now this tail position was not passive. They adapted, splitting into 2 groups to divide his attention. 6 coming from the direct 6 o'clock, 5 from the 7 o'clock low. Standard counter tactics. Donovan had expected this. He made a decisive call over the intercom, his voice flat. "Waist gunners, you've got 7 o'clock. I'm holding 6. He then violated another core tenet of defense. He ignored the peripheral threat completely. He trusted his crewmates and focused every ounce of his being, every round in his belts, on the 6 direct attackers. As they dove in, he picked the lead aircraft. A short burst, a flash, an explosion. The formation wavered. He immediately shifted to the new leader. Another burst, another fireball. In 30 seconds of mechanical, ruthless precision, 3 more BF-109s fell from the sky. The attack disintegrated. The remaining fighters, their nerve broken, peeled away in full retreat, not to reposition, but to flee. In the cockpit, Whitmore and his co-pilot exchanged a look of stunned disbelief. The intercom was silent, save for the heavy breathing of the crew. They had just witnessed a single tail gunner break a coordinated attack by sheer, audacious aggression. But Donovan, reloading his guns, checking his ammo count, 200 rounds expended, 800 left, felt no triumph. Only the cold understanding that the equation had changed. But the mission was only half over. The Germans would be back,
and they would be angrier and smarter. The real test was yet to come. He had proven his theory could disrupt. Now, he would have to prove it could survive an onslaught. The reprieve was brief. For 15 minutes, Hell's Fury droned onward, the formation tightening as it neared the initial point for the bomb run. The sky around them, however, was not empty. The 12 surviving Bf-109s from the first engagement had not fled the battle. They had instead pulled back to a cautious distance, orbiting just outside effective gun range, dark specks against the high cloud layer. They were shadowing, stalking. Captain Whitmore, scanning the hostile dots, understood their purpose immediately. His voice was tight over the intercom. "They're calling in reinforcements. They're vectoring in every fighter in the sector. Brace yourselves." He was right. 10 minutes later, the radio crackled with warnings from other bombers in the formation. Radar operators and sharp-eyed waist gunners reported new contacts converging from the east and south. Not a squadron, but a veritable air brigade. A full Gruppe of the Luftwaffe, comprising 3 entire Staffeln, swept into view. A mix of Bf-109s and the heavier, deadlier Focke-Wulf FW-190s, their distinctive radial engines glowing in the sun. 36 fresh fighters. Combined with the 12 Shadows, it meant 48 enemy aircraft were now maneuvering to annihilate a single, isolated B-17. Hell's Fury had drifted dangerously from the protective umbrella of the main bomber stream during the earlier, violent evasions. The nearest friendly fortress was a distant, impotent silhouette 3 miles away. Their promised fighter escort of P-51 Mustangs was entangled elsewhere, a promise broken by the chaos of the battle. They were utterly, terrifyingly alone. In the tail, Donovan performed the grim arithmetic. He had 380 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition remaining. 48 fighters. The numbers were not just against him. They were a sick joke. Standard procedure in this scenario was a litany of last rites, radio frantic mayday calls, attempt a desperate sprint back to the formation, have every gunner, tail, waist, ball turret, top turret, fire defensively in their assigned sectors, and hope the overlapping fire and the bomber's legendary toughness would allow them to survive long enough for help to arrive, or for the Germans to exhaust themselves. It was a doctrine of pure, distributed attrition, and against these odds, it was a blueprint for a funeral. Donovan keyed his intercom, his voice disturbingly calm amid the rising panic. "Captain, permission to try something." Whitmore's reply was edged with the strain of command. "What now, Sergeant?" "Attack." Silence. Then Whitmore's voice, carefully controlled. "Explain." "Those 48 are forming up for a coordinated mass assault," Donovan said, his words rapid but clear. "Give them 2 more minutes, and they'll hit us from every angle at once, high, low, stern, beam. We can't defend against that. We can't survive that. But we can disrupt it. If I engage now, while they're still organizing, while they're in their tightest, most vulnerable formation, I can force them to scatter before they're ready to execute." "You'll be out of ammunition in 30 seconds, Whitmore shot back. "Then I'd better make them count, sir," Donovan replied, the street fighter's logic absolute. "Defensive tactics don't work when you're outnumbered 20 to 1. Our only chance is aggressive action while they're still vulnerable, not reactive action when they're at full killing speed." In the cockpit, Whitmore had 3 seconds to decide. He looked at his co-pilot, at the sea of enemy aircraft painting his windscreen, and made the choice that would pass into legend. "Do it," he said. the ghost of a grim humor in his tone. "And if you get us all killed, I'm writing your family a very angry letter." Donovan didn't waste time with acknowledgement.
The German Gruppe was 2,000 yards out, a sprawling, majestic, and dangerously cohesive swarm. Lead elements were tipping into their attack dives. Trailing elements were sliding into support positions. It was a masterpiece of aerial choreography, and its very perfection was its weakness. Donovan didn't aim at a specific aircraft. He aimed at the idea of the formation itself. He depressed the triggers and held them down. This was not suppressive fire. This was a sustained, maximum-rate barrage. He poured 200 rounds, a tenth of his remaining ammo, directly into the geometric heart of the assembling Gruppe in a relentless 8-second torrent. Tracers slashed through the tightly packed airspace where coordination lived. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. A Bf-109 in the center of the formation took a fuel tank hit and spiraled down, a comet of orange and black. Two others, pilots instinctively jerking their sticks to evade the sudden storm, collided in a silent, blossoming cloud of debris. The psychological shock was total. The meticulously planned assault disintegrated into 48 individual acts of survival. The sky became a chaotic swirl of aircraft breaking in every direction, their attack plan shredded before a single cannon had fired at the bomber. "Holy!" Whitmore's voice cut off over the intercom. He didn't need to finish. Every man aboard had seen it. One tail gunner, with what appeared to be a suicidal act of defiance, had just shattered the largest fighter assault any of them had ever witnessed. But Donovan knew the truth. He had bought time, not victory. Maybe 90 seconds. The Germans, now humiliated and furious, would regroup with a vengeance, and he had 180 rounds left. They regrouped faster than he anticipated. This time, they abandoned finesse. Coordination was replaced by primal swarm tactics. 12 fighters dove from the direct 6 o'clock position in a near vertical overlapping mass. No formation, no staggered approach, just raw, overwhelming violence designed to saturate his field of fire and crush him through sheer volume. Donovan's mind, operating now on a plane of pure instinct and calculation, made another critical choice. He did not target the closest fighter, nor the most aggressive. He targeted the psychological center of the swarm, the aircraft in the middle of the pack, the one whose continued advance gave courage to the others. He fired 3 perfectly spaced 30-round bursts into 3 consecutive aircraft in the heart of the maelstrom. All 3 took hits. One vanished in a fireball. The other 2 sheared away, trailing thick, oily smoke. The remaining 9 pressed the attack, now inside 400 yards. German 20mm cannon shells began to rip the air around the tail, the distinctive bam-bam-bam sound felt in the bones. The bomber shuddered as hits connected. Metal shrieked. A hydraulic line in the tail severed, spraying fluid. Donovan ignored it all. His world had narrowed to his gun sight and the closing shapes. Target, squeeze, break, next target, squeeze. It was mechanical, rhythmic, devoid of fear. Another Bf-109 fell, then another. 5 remained. At 200 yards, point-blank range, he could see the pale ovals of the pilots' faces in their cockpits. Young men, determined, professional. He shot them anyway. 2 more fighters exploded. 3 left. At 100 yards, the survivors, realizing the cost had become insanity, broke away violently, the risk of collision now exceeding any possible reward. Donovan tracked the last fighter, a Focke-Wulf wobbling from damage. He squeezed the trigger. Click. He squeezed again. Click, click, click. The guns were dry. He had expended his final 180 rounds. In 45 seconds of apocalyptic engagement, He had destroyed 6 more German fighters. But now he was defenseless. "I'm out," he called over the intercom, his voice still eerily flat. "Dry on all guns." "Copy," Whitmore responded, the strain audible.
"Damage report." The crew checked in. The ball turret was jammed with minor damage. The rudder cables had stress fractures but held. A waist gunner had a superficial shrapnel wound. Miraculously, everyone was alive. Hell's Fury could still fly. But she was now a lamb before the wolves, her most dangerous tooth pulled. The Germans knew it. They regrouped one final time. 27 aircraft remained from the original 48. They had lost 21 fighters, an entire staffel and more, to a single bomber. The loss rate was militarily catastrophic. But they held one card. The tale was silent. They formed up for a final merciless execution. They approached from the one vector Donovan's empty guns could not contest. The direct, low 6 o'clock. Slow, methodical. No wasted energy. This was not a battle. It was a firing squad. Donovan watched them come through his sight. 400 yards. 300. 200. He had no ammunition, no defense. But he had one weapon left, forged in those 48 previous kills. Psychology. He traversed his empty guns. With exquisite, deliberate slowness, he tracked the lead German fighter. He kept the Pipper perfectly centered on its cockpit, his movements smooth and professional, the pantomime of a master gunner poised to fire. The lead German pilot, his nerves already frayed by the carnage he had witnessed, saw the twin muzzles of the 50 calibers align unwaveringly on him. Knowledge said the guns were empty, but instinct, hardened by combat and the sight of so many comrades falling to this very position, screamed louder. When someone aims at you, you evade. It is the deepest wiring of a fighter pilot. He broke formation in a sudden, violent turn. The rest of the formation, conditioned to follow their leader, broke with him. The perfect attack disintegrated. Not because Donovan could shoot, but because they believed he could. The phantom threat, conjured by reputation and relentless aggression, was more powerful than live ammunition.
"They're breaking off!" The ball turret gunner's voice cracked with incredulous relief. "They're actually breaking off!" And they were. The German fighters scattered, did not regroup. The cost had simply become too high. They disengaged completely, fading back toward their bases, leaving Hell's Fury riddled with holes, hydraulics weeping, tail guns silent, to limp alone toward the target. They bombed the Augsburg factory, turned for home, and encountered 3 more fighter groups on the return leg. None engaged. Word had already spread through German radio channels. A single B-17, tail number such and such, with a demon in the rear, had just destroyed 21 aircraft. The warning was clear. Avoid that aircraft. It is not a bomber. It is a trap. When Hell's Fury touched down at Framlingham, the ground crew swarmed over her, counting 47 bullet holes, 13 cannon strikes, a severed hydraulic line, and a cracked rudder spar. Crew Chief Frank Murphy found Donovan sitting on the tarmac, smoking a cigarette, hands steady. "You used everything," Murphy said, awe in his voice. 2,000 rounds. Every last bullet. "Had to," Donovan replied, exhaling a plume of smoke. "Didn't have enough to waste any." The final tally, pieced together from crew reports, escort fighter confirmations, and intercepted German communications, was staggering. 12 confirmed kills, 4 probables, 3 damaged. In 4 minutes of sustained combat. The news exploded through the 8th Air Force. Before the sun had set, every gunner, Every pilot, every commander was asking the same question. How? The answer was not just a story of amazing shooting. It was a new calculus of survival, written in fire and blood over the skies of Augsburg. It was a doctrine waiting to be born. The legend of March 6, 1944, spread through the 8th Air Force with the speed of a radio transmission. By the following morning, the enlisted men's barracks and officers' clubs at Framlingham and neighboring bases hummed with a single name: Donovan. But it wasn't just the number. 12 kills in a mission was unprecedented, mythical. It was the how. Gunners clustered around those who'd flown in formations near Hell's Fury, desperate for details. How far out did he fire? How did he decide who to shoot? Didn't he run out of ammo? Pilots, burdened with the responsibility of entire crews, saw in Donovan's actions not just bravery, but a potential strategic key to reducing the butcher's bill they paid every time they crossed the channel. The institutional response was swift. Within 48 hours, a staff car arrived at the 390th's dispersal site. Emerging from it was Major General Frederick L. Anderson, Jr., the commanding officer of the 8th Air Force's Bomber Command. He found Staff Sergeant Michael Donovan not in debriefing or celebration, but in a quiet corner of a maintenance hangar, methodically stripping and cleaning his twin 50 caliber Brownings. Standard post-mission procedure, nothing special. The general dismissed the salutes and formality. "At ease, Sergeant. I'm here to understand what you did," in plain English. Donovan explained. He spoke not in the jargon of manuals, but in the stark logic of the street and the sky. He outlined the core insight. The flaw was in ceding the initiative. Defensive doctrine made the gunner a reactor, dancing to the Luftwaffe's tune. His method was to attack the enemy's process, their formation, their confidence, their plan, long before he attacked their aircraft. He spoke of psychological disruption, of ammunition economy through prevention, of accepting calculated personal risk to break the enemy's collective will. General Anderson, a West Point graduate and seasoned planner, listened without interruption. When Donovan finished, the general asked one piercing question. "Can you teach this? Not to everyone, to the right men." Donovan was silent for a moment. "Sir, not everyone's got the temperament. You need gunners who think less like guardsmen waiting at a gate and more like hunters. Men who see a formation of fighters and don't see a threat, but an opportunity. Men who'd rather feel the recoil of their own guns than the impact of a 20mm shell. Find them," Anderson ordered. "You are hereby reassigned to training command. Develop a curriculum. Select the candidates. Your mission now is to transform tail gunner tactics across the entire 8th Air Force. Effective immediately." Donovan hesitated, a rare crack in his composure. "Sir, with respect, I'd prefer to stay with my crew." General Anderson's response was gentle but merciless in its logic. "Sergeant, your crew doesn't need you anymore. They are alive because of what you did. Right now, as we speak, other crews are dying because their gunners don't know what you know. Which is more important, 9 men or 9,000? The answer, as Anderson knew it would be, was obvious. Michael Donovan's personal war ended that day. He never flew another combat mission. For the remainder of the conflict, his battlefield was the classroom and the training range. He spent the next month codifying what would become known, first informally, and then in official memos, as the Donovan Doctrine, Principles of Aggressive Tail Gunnery. The core tenets were a direct refutation of the old orthodoxy. Seize the temporal initiative. Engagement begins in the enemy's formation phase, not his attack phase. Force the fighter pilot to react to you from the moment he appears on the horizon. Wage psychological warfare. The first burst is a communication, not a kill shot. Its purpose is to intimidate, to inject doubt and hesitation into a coordinated attack, making it cautious and disjointed. Focus fire to the point of neglect. When overwhelmed, do not divide attention. Concentrate all firepower on the single most dangerous sector, or the psychological center of the attack. Trust your fellow gunners to handle their sectors. Attempting to cover all angles guarantees failure in all. Achieve ammunition economy through aggression. 30 rounds that force 12 fighters to break formation is infinitely more efficient than 300 rounds spent engaging those same 12 fighters individually after they've begun their firing passes. Prevention is cheaper than cure. Embrace the asymmetric risk calculus. Defensive doctrine led to high casualties through passivity. Aggressive doctrine accepted a higher degree of personal exposure for the tail gunner in exchange for a drastically increased probability of mission and crew survival. The bomber and its 9 men were the strategic asset. The gunner was a component. A component that could act as a force multiplier was worth the risk. The doctrine faced immediate, fierce resistance. Traditional gunnery instructors, many of them combat veterans of the early, disastrous days, called it suicidal folly. They argued it encouraged wild firing, wasted precious ammunition, and would get gunners killed faster. Quartermasters and logistics officers wrote memos protesting the potential increase in ammunition expenditure per mission. Conservative command staff worried it would disrupt tight bomber formations if every tail gunner started shooting at ghosts. But then, the statistics began to talk, and they spoke in a language no memo could rebut. In March 1944, the month of Donovan's defining mission, the tail gunner casualty rate in the 8th Air Force stood at the historic and tragic average of 38%. By June 1944, after the first waves of Donovan-trained gunners had entered combat, that rate had plummeted to 23%. Same skies, same enemy, different mindset. A 15-point drop represented thousands of lives. The deeper impact was seen in German effectiveness. Pre-Donovan, German fighter pilots completed over 52% of their planned attack runs against bomber boxes. By mid-June, that completion rate had been hacked down to 27%. Aggressive fire was breaking up attacks before they could even properly begin. The psychological shockwave extended beyond the immediate tracers. Radio intercepts by Allied intelligence began picking up chilling and exhilarating transmissions between German squadron leaders. Achtung, Indianer. Attention, Indians, a slang term for aggressive bomber gunners, or more direct orders. Vermeiden Sie die direkte Heckansprache auf die viermotorigen, die früh feuern. Avoid direct stern attacks on the 4-engine ones that fire early. The mere reputation of a Donovan-trained crew began to create a tangible buffer of safety around a bomber. Donovan himself proved a ruthless, unconventional instructor. He selected candidates not just on marksmanship scores, but on a cold-eyed assessment of temperament. He looked for decisiveness, comfort with ambiguity, and a near-psychotic lack of passive instinct. Roughly 30% of volunteers washed out, unable to overcome the deeply ingrained wait-and-see programming. Those who passed underwent a grueling 2-week crucible of live-fire exercises against towed sleds simulating high-speed fighter passes. classroom studies of German fighter tactics, and relentless psychological conditioning. His favorite mantra, drilled into every graduate, was, "Fear is what you feel when you're reacting. Confidence is what you feel when you're acting first." His graduates, an elite fraternity scattered across bomb groups, became the new aristocrats of the air. They developed the doctrine further, adding their own innovations. Sergeant Thomas "Trigger" Bailey, a Donovan pupil, destroyed 16 enemy aircraft in his first 4 missions.
Sergeant Robert Chen completed 27 missions, without his tail position ever taking a serious hit. His aggressive reputation preceding him so thoroughly that German pilots would visibly break off once they saw his early accurate tracers. The doctrine had evolved beyond its creator, a living thing adapting to the chaos of war. By the summer of 1944, the impact was being analyzed by the enemy. Captured Luftwaffe training manuals and after-action reports contained specific, frustrated passages addressing the new American tactics. One report from a Jagdgeschwader commander in June 1944 stated, "The Americans have fundamentally altered their defensive gunner tactics. They now engage our formations during the approach phase with sustained, disruptive fire. The effect is less physical than psychological, shattering our coordination before it can be brought to bear. Recommendation: avoid classical stern attacks altogether. Employ only high-angle diving attacks from the 11 or 1 o'clock positions, where their tail gunner's field of fire is weakest." This was a monumental admission of defeat. The high-angle attack was more difficult, less accurate, and riskier for the fighter. It was a tacit confession that the Luftwaffe had lost the tactical initiative in the gunner versus fighter duel. The psychological battle had irrevocably turned. Now it was the German pilots who felt a knot of fear seeing a fortress's tail twitch toward them, not the gunner freezing as the fighters lined up. When the war ended, Michael Donovan quietly mustered out. He returned to South Boston, traded his flight jacket for workman's clothes, and spent the next 16 years in construction, a foreman on high-rise projects, his past locked away. He married, raised 3 children, and never ever volunteered a story about the war. When journalists finally tracked him down in the 1960s, drawn by creeping historical interest in the air war, he politely but firmly declined all interviews.
His statement was consistent and telling. "I did what needed doing. So did 10,000 other gunners. They're the real story." One of those gunners, Thomas Bailey, disagreed. In a 1972 interview, the old veteran explained the Donovan impact with perfect clarity. "Before Mike, we all thought survival meant making yourself small, hunkering down in that turret, being a tough target, conserving your stuff until the last second. Mike taught us that survival means making the enemy small, making him so goddamn scared to come near you that he finds somebody else to pick on. Sounds simple. It changed everything." The numbers bore Bailey out. An 8th Air Force internal study in 1945 compared loss rates. From March to May 1944, the average was 14 bombers lost per 1,000 sorties. From June to August 1944, after the Donovan Doctrine's widespread adoption, that average fell to 8 bombers per 1,000 sorties, a 43% reduction in losses, against the same hardened German defenses. Post-war analysis of captured German records suggested Luftwaffe effectiveness against bomber formations had declined by over 60% from early 1944 peaks, with internal enemy analysts attributing 28% of that decline directly to aggressive American gunner tactics. Michael Donovan never knew these numbers. He never read the German after-action reports. He never saw the detailed studies that credited his ideas with saving an estimated 300 bombers and over 3,000 aircrew lives. He died in 1998 at the age of 76. His obituary in the Boston Globe was brief. It mentioned his Distinguished Service Cross, his construction career, his family. One paragraph covered his war service. A veteran of World War II, he served as a tail gunner with the 8th Air Force in England, and later helped develop new aerial gunnery tactics. It did not mention 12 kills in 4 minutes. It did not mention the 300 men he trained. It did not mention the 3,000 he saved. It did not mention how a street fighter's logic, applied to the heavens, had rewritten a chapter of military science. His funeral at St. Augustine Cemetery was attended by 17 people: family, a few old friends from the docks, 2 war buddies. There was no military honor guard, no missing man formation, no 21-gun salute. The priest, who did not know the history, spoke of a faithful husband and a hard worker. But the other tail gunners knew. The night before, a group of them, men now in their 70s, with grandchildren and bad knees, had gathered at a dim bar in South Boston. They raised glasses of cheap whiskey. They told chaotic, laughing stories of missions over Bremen and Berlin, of tracers in the night, of the strange calm that came when you decided to shoot first. Thomas Bailey, his hand still steady, gave the toast. His voice was rough with emotion. Mike Donovan never thought he was anything special. Just a guy doing his job in the worst seat on the plane. But his job, his way of doing his job, saved more of us than any medal ever could. Every bomber that made it home because some German kid lost his nerve. Every gunner who finished his tour because he learned to be a hunter, not a target. Every crew that lived because the enemy decided we were too much trouble. That's Mike's legacy. It ain't 12 kills. It's 12,000 lives that went on, had families, built things. He taught us to hunt first. The Donovan Doctrine never faded. It was absorbed into the DNA of modern aerial combat. Fighter pilot dogfight strategy emphasizes first look, first shot, first kill, the purest translation of seizing the initiative. Door gunners on transport helicopters and gunships employ psychological saturation fire. The core concept of early engagement to disrupt command and control is the foundational principle of modern missile defense systems, from the phalanx CIWS on ships to cyber warfare protocols. It is a principle born in the frozen, desperate minutes over Augsburg. March 6, 1944, lasted only 240 seconds. In that time, one man, in the most vulnerable position on a bomber, using weapons considered obsolete by the war's end, redefined the relationship between defender and attacker. He proved that true defense is not a shield, but a spear pointed at the enemy's heart. He demonstrated that courage is not just the capacity to endure punishment, but the will to punish first. Michael "Mad Mike" Donovan fired 2,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. He destroyed 12 enemy aircraft. He saved, by conservative estimate, 3,000 lives. He changed the course of aerial warfare. He did it not because he was a hero born for legend, but because he was a survivor from South Boston who refused to wait for death to come find him. He went hunting first, and in doing so he taught a generation of men that in the calculus of violence, aggression is not recklessness. It is the purest, most logical form of self-preservation.